and this is part 2 of that webinar series. My name is Mandy Hawker, and we will get started. Okay, a little bit of housekeeping before we jump in and get started. I want to offer just a quick disclaimer. In this session, we will be sharing several instructional strategies or instructional ideas. However, we want to remind you to consult your high-quality instructional materials for support first, and those are your textbooks. So we just want to offer that information as well, that you have that resource to tap into, but these resources that we're sharing with you, these strategies, can kind of fill in any holes or gaps that you might have in instruction. Additionally, let's introduce ourselves to each other. I'll start. My name is Mandy Hawker. I'm the Elementary ELA Education Associate at the South Carolina Department of Ed for the Office of Assessment and Standards, and I work with the standard side of our office. Our middle level education associate has decided to move back into working in her hometown. So we're kind of splitting up her webinars this summer. So I've been really building my capacity to support middle level in as we're finding a replacement for her. With me this morning, I have another coworker. Her name is Casey Prince Harvey. And Casey, I'll let you introduce yourself.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Casey Prince Harvey. I see some familiar faces. I think some of you have attended our webinars in the past. My role in the Office of Assessment and Standards is Education Associate for Humanities, and I also offer ELA support, particularly with secondary, since that is my background, but I really support all of our content areas, K-12, on their standards review, revision, and approval. So I'm happy to be here with you.
All right, we'd love for you all to introduce yourselves, if you will. Tell us your name, the area or district or school that you support, and then tell us what you're doing the rest of your July 5th. Hopefully not working. So let us know in the comments. And Casey, I'll let you share some of those.
All right, I see Casadena, 5th grade ELA Social Studies. Oh, and you're in my former district. That's where I'm from. Amy coming from Spartanburg 7, 5th grade ELA. Audra coming from Clover with 7th grade ELA. Katie from York 1 with 6th grade. Let's see, Jean and Anderson 1. Cody and Spartanburg 1. Carla in Spartanburg. Got a lot of Spartanburg people today. That's exciting. See a couple people still typing. And it looks like we've got a good range too, from 5th grade all the way up to high school English.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Casey's going to drop into the chat 2 links for you now. We're excited to have you with us today, especially on July 5th. What a commitment to education for you to be here. So I appreciate your attendance. But Casey will drop in the link to our landing page as well as our attendance link. This attendance link will help us with recording who is here today, so we can issue those recertification credits at the end of our session. But the landing page will hold all of the links that we'll need throughout our presentation together today. And so make sure you grab that.
Mandy, just FYI, and for anyone in the chat, I've pinned the landing page and attendance to the very top of the chat. So if you need to go back to it, it's right there at the top.
Perfect. Thank you, Casey. Yes, we've been learning some tips and tricks this summer with our online and virtual presentations. So that is definitely a tip and trick to find that landing page and attendance link right at the top if you need it. All right. Now, one question we get so often is, how can I get recertification credit for attending these webinars? Well, beginning this summer, we've been able to issue recertification credit, and it falls with 3 expectations. The first is live attendance and participation in our session today. The next is that you remain in attendance for the duration of our time together. And then finally, completing that attendance form at the very beginning of our presentation, and then our feedback form at the very end. We'll be happy to offer 1 hour of recertification credit for every hour you attend these virtual sessions. So we're excited to be able to offer that. So this is part 2 of a 2-part series on AOR 4.1. Part 1 was on June 25th, and during that presentation, we talked about the vertical articulation and the shifts in content and complexity, as well as what was the indicator intent for AOR 4.1. If you'd like, that recording is shared at the bottom of your landing page that Casey shared, so you can go back and watch that if you weren't able to be with us in person. Today is going to be focusing on the instructional application of AOR 4.1. So let's get started. Our purpose today. I'll let you take a minute and just read our purpose. And our goal today is really that last part, to enhance our instruction so that it's aligned to the indicator language and then improve student outcomes, because that's the entire purpose that we're in education, right? We want to improve student outcomes and prepare them for the future to be successful. So you may be wondering, the middle level series for this summer was pretty specific. Why are we providing intentional webinars on these specific middle level indicators? Why did we choose to begin this middle level series with AOR 3.1, AOR 4.1, and AOR 5.3? So we picked these specific indicators to focus on for this summer series because this is where there were the most significant shifts or the most clarified language or misconceptions in the 2024 ELA standards. So when people ask you what changed the most in middle school, you can really point them to AOR 3.1, 4.1, and 5.3. So beginning our focus in helping coaches and teachers across the state dig into these indicators was important for us, so we can all kind of calibrate. They're the great equalizer, right? These new standards, we all are coming to it with a blank slate, and we can bring what we know from the 2015 standards, but this new way of looking at these indicators is definitely an equalizer for us. All right. That being said, I'd like to get us started with this quote and an article. So I love this quote by James Clear from Atomic Habits. It's something that I read personally, but I think it really applies professionally as well. The secret to getting results that last is to never stop making improvements. If you've been in any of our regional trainings or in our webinars before, you may have read or seen the Better Than Best Practice article that we share in some of our trainings. Casey's going to drop that in the chat now. What I'd like for you to do, even if you've read it before or seen it before, I want you to read it and think about it in the lens of what we just talked about with considering the biggest indicator shifts for middle level. So when we think about making improvements based on those indicators, making improvements to our instruction to better support student outcomes, I want you to read the article in that light, and then we're going to come back to the chat and talk about it in just a second. So I'll give you about 3 minutes to read the article. Okay, you have about 1 more minute. As you wrap up your reading of that Better Than Best Practice article, I want you to respond to the article in 1 sentence in the chat. You can summarize what the article was about or summarize your opinion on the article content. 1 sentence.
And Mandy, I'm seeing some responses in the chat. Application of a lifelong learner, that practice is an ongoing process for consistent improvement. The term best practice can stifle innovation and growth, which we've shared a good bit in our webinars as well. Best implies an absolute, whereas using better allows for growth and change. Best practice places limits. Again, a lot of people saying there's always room for improvement. Better practice insinuates that we're constantly improving and working towards getting better. Let's see. Sounds like it's saying best practice is not the same for everyone, and therefore it's vague. And what applies to one may not be the same for another.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Ellen makes a great point. I've always thought of best as your best at the time. So a lot of good responses here.
I love that.
Yeah.
I know as my personality type, I unfortunately am a type 1 on the Enneagram, and that makes me a perfectionist. So when I read in Atomic Habits by James Clear, I read it is to never stop making improvements. It hurt my feelings, right? I want to be the best. I want to be the greatest there is at something. And so for us as educators to remember that we never hit that best mark, there's never the pinnacle that you don't stop growing afterwards. That's a tough pill to swallow for some of us. So but it's comforting to know that we're all in the same boat. We're all striving to do better for our students. Well, with that in mind, I want us to adapt that mindset as we move into the next part of our webinar. So we're going to go into 4 sections over the next hour. We're going to review some information from our first webinar on AOR 4.1. We're going to talk a little bit about what is evidence-based instruction and how it is required by law. Then we're going to look at the actual grade level application. We're going to see AOR 4.1 in practice, and then we'll have a little clarity and closure. So before we dig too much into that instructional information, I want us to take a brief look at the vertical articulation of AOR 4.1. KPH is going to drop that into the chat for us. Again, we did this in our last webinar, but which key terms draw your attention? What terms do teachers, and more specifically our students, need to know and understand in order to demonstrate proficiency in these indicators? Now, I will say, while these terms are not new, they are more clearly defined and articulated in AOR 4.1. So this is not something brand new for ELA to talk about perspective and purpose, right? But it is more clearly defined and articulated in the 2024 standards. It's also important for us to take a look at the standard language across the top of our page where it says we are looking within and across informational texts. It's important because last time we were looking at literary text, now we're looking at informational text. I just want us to make sure we note that. And before we jump into each grade level, let's do a quick review of that vertical articulation. So anybody want to drop into the chat if you were able to attend AOR 4.1 Part 1 or you've watched the recording, what were some of your major takeaways?
Mandy, we've got a lot of responses in the chat already.
Yay! Okay, thank you, Casey.
So as I'm looking through, a lot of people are pulling out like our Bloom's verbs, which is great because all of those are defined in our glossary. I'm seeing primary and secondary sources, perspective, rhetoric, purpose, style, and then of course all of that, like I said, all those Bloom's verbs: analyze, distinguish, determine, evaluate, critique. As it moves up that scale. So a lot of great responses so far, and everyone seems to kind of be on the same page. Emily pointed out perspective versus purpose, which is a lot of what we talked about in the very first webinar.
Awesome. So good. Yeah. Okay. So when we look at that vocabulary and how it's introduced across our grade levels, this is important to remember because when we look at second and third grade, that is where author's purpose and author's perspective are introduced. They are continued to be taught beyond those grades, but it's important for us to remember that that's already been introduced. It's already been defined. The students should be familiar with those terms. So when our students are in 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grade, we are using vocabulary that was already built upon in prior grades. So we don't have to redefine it for our students. Okay. Now, considering that vocabulary and taking time to really dig in and align ourselves to the vocabulary specifically used in the indicators is important. Take a minute and read this quote and think about why is it important for us to be familiar with the indicator specific vocabulary. As you make those connections, write in the chat why you think it's important for us to acclimate ourselves to the indicator vocabulary.
I'm seeing some responses about assessment, that the language of the indicators will be what students are assessed on, so making sure they're familiar with that language. Let's see, how to do with rhetoric. Okay. Mariana, that's the rhetoric support document, which I can put back in the chat for you. Use terms students are familiar with, see them in context, they're more likely to be able to apply their understanding, teacher modeling.
Casey, I'm going to stop you right there for just one thing. The comment you said about referring to language students already know, you said the terms that they've already been exposed to. So interestingly, when the writing committee and the review committees were looking at author's purpose, author's perspective, and point of view as 3 separate terms in the 2015 standards, there were several occurrences of those terms being conflated. So if the terms were being conflated, what did that mean for when we assess our students? Did they know what they were being assessed on? It could have been called this or that, but it wasn't clear. The indicators weren't clear. So it was a huge undertaking of the ELA writing committee to articulate what exactly is the point of view. What exactly is author's purpose? What is author's perspective? So that those are articulated clearly in AOR 3.1, 4.1, and 5.3, but then also that they're assessed appropriately as well. I'm so glad you mentioned that in the chat. Go ahead, Casey. Were there any more?
Let's see.
Now you can all go forth and be our ambassadors, saying that the vocabulary within the indicators is essential to be familiar with in order for students to have success. So that will move us into part 2, evidence-based instruction. So before we kick off our evidence-based instruction discussion, if you'll remember that in the AOR 3.1 Part 2, Brenna presented some information in an article on what is the difference in evidence-based instruction and research-based instruction. Well, today, Casey's going to drop that article in the chat for you again, but today I didn't want to belabor that information because you've already seen it before if you've attended those webinars, but I did want to bring a different facet into the discussion with evidence-based practice. In just a second, we're going to watch a short clip of a video from Barbara Forman. Now, Barbara Forman is on the board of the Florida Center for Reading Research and one of the leading researchers on literacy instruction in the United States. She also served and consulted as part of the development of the 2024 ELA standards for South Carolina. So let's take a look at how Barbara Forman shares the definition of evidence-based practice.
Why is evidence-based practice important? There is a risk in using activities, strategies, or interventions that haven't been validated through empirical studies. Is some evidence more trustworthy than other evidence? These are important questions to ask when planning literacy, instruction, and intervention. The Every Student Succeeds Act, often referred to as ESSA, requires us to use evidence-based practices. ESSA defines evidence-based practice as an activity or intervention that demonstrates a statistically significant effect on improving student outcomes or other relevant outcomes based on either strong, moderate, or promising evidence from research.
Okay, now there's a lot of jargon in that definition, but let's take a look at the definition. All right, so on your screen here, this is the definition that Barbara Forman shared on what is evidence-based instruction. Take a minute and read this definition twice. Before we begin to discuss this definition, I want to point out that the Every Student Succeeds Act is a law that guides our instruction in South Carolina and across the nation. So if it's the law, then we need to abide by it as educators, right? So it outlines and defines that evidence-based instruction is an activity, strategy, or intervention that has a statistically significant effect on improving student outcomes. Okay, well, what does that mean? Then it says that ESSA also requires educators to implement evidence-based interventions, which are practices or programs that have been shown to be effective at improving outcomes. In just a few minutes, when we move into our instructional strategies, you'll find that each of those is rooted in evidence-based research. They were selected because they demonstrate a significant effect on improving student outcomes. Reading the law, hearing it from Barbara Forman, and talking through it together, I want us to answer this question. Have you, or how have you, evaluated your current practices in light of this definition and law? Go ahead and drop that in the chat. I'll be very transparent with you all. If I was asked this question maybe 4 years ago, I would say I have never considered my instruction or evaluated my current practice in light of this definition in law because I wasn't familiar with it. It wasn't until I moved to this position that I saw what this law expects and what it requires of us as educators. Casey, what are we seeing in the chat?
Mandy. I'm seeing a variety of responses in the chat. Always monitoring students' progress through iReady and other assessments, then following up with strategies to improve. Always reflecting. Unfortunately, I haven't. PLCs. Observations and taking observations and training seriously, but maybe hasn't necessarily reflected based on the language of the law. Watching student progression through activities, to know where we might need to revisit things or improve in certain areas, results from specific lessons and activities, and then looking at the success or failure based on student data, tracking data and monitoring. So a couple people have mentioned iReady as the platform that they use. Documenting strategies or interventions through formative assessments or on large-scale benchmarks, map assessment data, common screeners, MTSS. And here's a good one from Jessica. While I constantly reflect on my teaching, I don't know that I scrutinize my instruction to this degree. I take for granted that I'm using instructional strategies I know are effective, but it makes me want to dig deeper in my planning. Right. That's an excellent point.
I love that. And a very honest response. I would say that that's where I fell. I absolutely evaluated my practices in light of if my students were getting it and if students had success with it. But considering if it was an evidence-based strategy or intervention, I don't know that I ever got to that level of scrutiny. So just a quick review of the difference in research-based or evidence-based practices or instruction. Research-based. That's based on theoretical or initial research findings. So it's not something that you just pull out of your back pocket, right? They do have a theoretical or research background. They are supported by that initial research and theory, but they may not be widely tested or proven for diverse practical application. So that's a big one. Yes, this idea, this intervention, this instruction strategy may work with this group, but does it work wide scale? Is it a strategy or an intervention that would work in Pickens and in Richland and in Colleton and in Beaufort? Or would it work in South Carolina and Alaska and New York, right? Wide scale. Research also may still be in experimental stages or early implementation phases. Now, when we look at evidence-based practices, those are practices that are based on empirical evidence demonstrating effectiveness in real-world settings. So these have been taken out, tried, and run through a battery of evaluations in actual application. They're supported by extensive, high-quality empirical research showing consistent, positive outcomes for students. And then finally, they're widely implemented across different demographics, across different ages, and then they're proven effective in various educational settings. So just having that familiarity with these definitions is important because that brings us to one way of looking at evidence-based practice. So there are a variety of researchers who have studied evidence-based instruction. Today, we're going to look at the work of John Hattie. He is known for his extensive work in evaluating the effectiveness of various instructional strategies. And he's particularly known for his research on the factors that influence student achievement and for his development of the concept visible learning. And we can drop that link in the chat as well. It's also linked on your landing page. Visible learning is a comprehensive synthesis of 800 meta-analysis relating to education and the instruction of students and their achievement. Now, teacher instruction is just one piece of that. Other pieces with that might be like the environment that a student comes from, or the things that a student brings to the table, like if they've been not been sleeping, or if they are bored in class, or if they've been retained. Those are all different effects on a student's performance. But effect size uses a benchmark of 0.4, and you'll see that here, 0.4. and is the average effect size. That refers to the hinge point. Strategies with effect sizes above the 0.4 are considered to have significant positive effects on student learning. Now, where did we see that language? We saw that in ESSA, right? In the law. Significant effects on student learning. So throughout the rest of the presentation, you're going to hear me talk about effect size. And when I talk about anything above a 0.4, those are effect sizes that accelerate or speed up or increase student learning. So just for curiosity, what are some strategies that are above the hinge point? Take a look. These are a few different strategies that might be above the hinge point. Metacognitive strategies, self-questioning, problem-solving teaching, reciprocal teaching, giving feedback. Okay, those are all different strategies that are above the hinge point. As we look through our resources today, just a few minutes, we're going to look at a couple of suggestions of instructional strategies. You'll see the effect size listed there for you. All right, so now, after talking about ESSA, talking about evidence-based practice, and talking a little bit about John Hattie and effect size, I want you to drop a comment in the chat. And in that comment, I want you to wrap up the discussion that we had on evidence-based instruction or evidence-based strategies. What was the big idea about evidence-based strategies? Okay, again, we're just dropping a comment into the chat telling me what was the big idea about evidence-based strategies or evidence-based instruction. What was the big idea that we need to know? For me, if I was going to sum up that evidence-based strategy section, it would be that evidence-based instruction is required by law. And one way to find evidence-based strategies is to look at the work of John Hattie in Visible Learning. Casey, are there any other comments in the chat?
None that I'm seeing yet.
All right, well, that must mean that y'all are ready to get into the grade level application. So we'll just move forward. But if you do have a comment, please do share, drop that in the chat for us. And let's move into the grade level application. So this next section is really going to follow the same format that Brenna followed in her AOR 3.1 presentation. We're going to follow the MOP strategy. In just a second, Casey's going to drop into the chat 2 links. The first link gives you access to a folder with examples of the instructional strategies for AOR 4.1. The second link is going to link you to the MOP note catcher, which will be how we record our thinking today. The MOP analogy stands for M, mastery. How would this activity support students' mastery of AOR 4.1? O, organization. where would the activity that we're sharing fall within the overall organization of an instructional unit on AOR 4.1? And then finally, P, what prior knowledge would students need to be able to bring to complete this activity? So let's take a look at the 5th grade example together. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to open up the 5th grade example. You see all my 800 tabs at the top. I definitely I keep a few open. I don't know if any of you feel that way as well. All right, so when you open up your examples, at the top, you'll see your 5th grade indicator, if we're in the 5th grade example. But your indicator language as well as your indicator insight will populate here at the top of the document. You'll scroll down, and any important vocabulary for that indicator will be found right below. We felt it was important to put that vocabulary right in front of you so that you had it and defined easily. And then you see the instructional application section of our lesson. This is the activity here, and there's a hyperlink to a separate page where the activity lives. In the middle, you see that effect size. Again, that's from John Hattie's Visible Learning. This instructional strategy uses a graphic organizer, which has a 0.64 effect size. What do we know about that? That's going to accelerate student learning, definitely. And then finally, the 3rd column is just a short description of what this activity includes. So for this, you're going to read the articles and complete the Venn diagram, comparing and contrasting the articles, noting their different perspectives. So let's click on the link and take a look. As we do dig into these, I want to remind you that these are examples, not exemplars. So they definitely are just our take on how to instruct AOR 4.1. The first thing you'll do is read this primary account. So it's a primary account of the Northern Lights. Then you read a secondary account about the Northern Lights. And then finally, you complete the Venn diagram. We've included the Venn diagram here. Then at the very bottom, there's a written aspect to this activity where students would respond, how do the different perspectives impact the content of the texts? Very simple activity, but it meets the expectations of that indicator. Because let's go back to that indicator. What does it say? Compare and contrast a primary account and a secondary account of the same event or topic, identifying how the different perspectives impact the content of the text. That definitely meets that indicator expectation right there. So if we go back to our graphic organizer, our MOP organizer, I want us to answer these questions together. How would this activity support students' mastery of AOR 4.1? Drop into the chat your responses. How would the Northern Lights Venn diagram activity support students' mastery of AOR 4.1?
Mandy, I'm not seeing anything in the chat just yet, so I want to clarify. What we're doing right now is looking at the 5th grade example, and then in the chat dropping how we think the 5th grade activity could support student mastery of that indicator language and expectation. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Perfect.
So
Okay.
with that activity, we're making a Venn diagram of a primary account and a secondary account. And then we're answering the written prompt at the bottom of how do the perspectives affect the content of those articles. So how does that activity support students' mastery at the 5th grade level? It seems like maybe our July 5th is kicking in a little, so I'll help us along with this part. So that would absolutely help meet mastery of that indicator. The expectations are that they're comparing and contrasting a primary and secondary account on the same topic. Well, that's the ask, right? They're reading a primary account. Oh, Casadena, share with us. Yes.
I was just going to comment that maybe you guys need to refresh your screen or something, because we are having a whole bunch of comments in the thread.
Oh, thank you. I'm so sorry. Casey,
I don't know what's going on. I can't see any responses in the chat. But let me see if I can refresh myself. Hold on.
thank you for telling us, Casadena.
I can read some of the comments. It says,
That would be so great, Ellen.
Yes.
Thank you.
Amy says it would support student mastery of AOR 4.1 in giving them access to quality articles, compare and contrast the author's perspective. The Venn diagram allows them to organize their thinking in a neat way, and the writing aspect at the end makes the student explain their understanding.
Yes.
Jean says they're asked to evaluate both articles using a simple Venn diagram. We should easily see their level of mastery. And I said, I can hear my students go, huh? Questions can't be dumbed down, which is, I think, what we maybe do sometimes, just so, they can understand it or get through it or whatever. But I said students need to be challenged and taught to think again.
I love that.
Students would be able to make comparisons between two different sets of articles, organize their work, show understanding of the difference and similarities between the two pieces. The mastery is found in their written response.
Awesome. Thank you, Ellen. You're a good co-pilot. Thank you very much. I hate our technology is messing with us on July 5th. Maybe the fireworks blew our chat out. But thank you. Yeah, okay. I love your responses. The information about the articles, that's a huge one. So I did check the articles to be on an appropriate Lexile for 5th grade, but do I think there are better quality articles out there? Absolutely, right? And a lot of those can be found in your instructional materials, but then also as experts in this content, you have a toolkit or a tool belt full of resources to pull from. So that's another place for refinement in this activity. Now, within the overall organization of an instructional unit with this indicator, one thing I heard in the comments just now was about the level of questioning. The level of questioning at the end of this activity is rigorous, right? And sometimes we often reduce down our level of questioning to give students access. So this might be a culminating activity rather than one of those introductory activities with comparing perspectives for students. So I definitely, I appreciate that comment, because you're right. Could you imagine giving this to your students at the beginning of the unit and be like, here you go, tell me about the content shifts. Oh, they'd be a little overwhelmed. Now, what about the prior knowledge students have to access this activity? Well, they got to understand perspective. They've got to understand the skill of comparing and contrasting, because again, a Venn diagram can be daunting if it's not something that you've accessed before. But then they also need to have knowledge of what is content. That's kind of like one of those tier 2 ambiguous terms that if you haven't instructed and you haven't helped students to uncover the content of an article before, they're not going to be familiar with. They're not going to have access to that language. So that's definitely something that they need to explore before. Okay, now that we've walked through 5th grade together, I'd love for you to take 2 more grade levels. Maybe the grade level that you serve most often in your position, or an adjacent grade level, like above or below where you currently support, and explore that research and complete your MOP activity. So again, you have 6th, 7th, 8th, and English 1 activities there for you. Explore within those. I'll give you 10 minutes just to go through those, and then we're going to come back together and have a little reflection on it. So I'll be quiet for 10 minutes. I'm going to set myself a timer because it's kind of difficult for me. Thank you. Just a reminder, you have until 10:58 to explore any of the grade levels activities and respond back on the MOP. So you can say like, okay, I explored sixth grade and here's how I felt about the prior knowledge or the organization or mastery. So I already see some answers coming in the chat. I love seeing these comments. No, Alice, that's totally for your own records. No need to share it. Again, as you're finishing up looking through the different instructional activities, if you'll just drop into the chat, maybe one grade level you explored, and what do you think about the mastery, organization, or prior knowledge associated with that activity? Just drop it in the chat. Let us see your thinking. I love Audra's comment about, and Jean's comment about the cell phone debate. I know that is something that you middle level educators are really going to be facing when school starts back with the cell phone debate and the new law in South Carolina. So that might be something timely for the audiences that you support. Yeah, we all had a chuckle when we were putting that activity together because we thought, wow, how relevant is this for our seventh graders? Oh, I love seeing your comments coming in the chat. Very good. Okay. Eighth grade with rewriting an article from a different perspective. That was an activity that we really went back and forth on as a team, an ELA standards team. That is quite a challenge for our students, but how fun to get to rewrite an article that's somewhat controversial to maybe eighth grade students from that activist perspective or the lawmaker perspective. So, yeah. I also love seeing how y'all are talking about the organization of these activities. When you pull them up and you look at it and you think, holy cow, my students could not accomplish that in one class setting. Well, absolutely. How could you stretch some of these activities over days and days and days? Very good. And I love that you see where these activities are falling within your academic year. One comment that I really appreciate is talks about how this might fall into the beginning of the year for your grade level, whereas students may be able to tackle a more rigorous task with this indicator later on in the year. Casey, what are you seeing in the chat?
I'm seeing a lot of the same. I definitely have seen quite a few people mention the cell phone piece, and then I love seeing some of the different ways that you're determining where this might fall organizationally in the instructional unit, whether it's splitting up or even just the emphasis on the prior knowledge of vocabulary, which goes back to, I know we say it all the time, but the glossary, just making sure that students have access to those indicator specific definitions for clarity.
Mariana, that's a great question. Casey, I'm going to let you tackle that one about style.
Style. Okay, so let's see, what would style entail? Is that the rhetoric used between the two sources? So that would be like the intentional choices that each author makes, and like how they develop their own voice, if that makes sense. We have a definition for that in the glossary. I don't have it up right now, but that's what's standing out off the top of my head. So it could incorporate some of the rhetorical choices that the authors make. Absolutely.
Very good. Okay. All right. So thinking about what we just did, I want us to do a USA strategy in light of July 4th. So our USA is use, share, adapt. So in just a minute, I want you to drop this into the chat. And I want you to answer one of these three questions. What is one idea that you are excited to use that you saw this morning? What is one idea that you think you could share with a colleague? Or what is something that you could adapt that we shared this morning that you could adapt it and make it more useful for the grade level that you support? So, what's one thing you could use, one thing that you would like to share with someone, or one thing that you could take and adapt to support the audience that you serve? Choose one of those questions and answer that in the chat. And then you have a part 2 as well. So I would love for everybody to respond to either U, S, or A.
And as people are typing in, I want to go back to a comment earlier that Emily mentioned about 7th grade and bringing in the topic of video games. I know that the example that we gave was on cell phones, but that idea of even switching that topic to video games or something that's of high interest to the students in your classroom is a really great idea. Let's see, I see Ellen said she loves the 5th activity, could do all of it. Adapt the 7th grade activity to incorporate into current argumentative unit. Since 6th grade is the first time students are introduced to the concept of rhetoric. It makes me so happy, Jessica, that you pulled that out. Could use the activity as is for your honors ELA class and use the graphic organizer. Could adapt all of the 6th, 7th, and 8th, or looked at all the 6th, 7th, and 8th. Feel like you could adapt all the strategies to fit the 5th grade standards. Excited to use the 5th grade activity and the articles. Writing response could be used for other lessons. To give an idea, could give you a good idea how well students are understanding the goal of the standard. The cell phone activity is a really popular one. Use the 8th grade rewrite based on perspective.
Oh,
the AI comparison in English 1 with teachers. Definitely a hot topic. And then adapting the Venn diagram, just change the text for English 1. Really like the key vocabulary, layout of the application presented to students. Let's see. Understanding the organization for a lesson to facilitate mastery. So primary and secondary source. So reading a primary source, annotating, reading a secondary source, annotate for understanding, then a writing that incorporates the expectations of the standard or indicator. Changing perspectives reminds you of the old RAF strategies of changing roles, audience, format, topic, using hot topics for students like cell phones, video games, social media, modified balanced calendar. A lot of people are mentioning different graphic organizers that were shared in the folders and possibly using those.
I love the comment around the different hot topics. Here's a moment of transparency. So we preview with each other everything that we present out to the state many times before it ever comes to a webinar. So I presented initially to Casey Prince Harvey an idea for the English 1 lesson to be on debating the death penalty. And she quickly talked me through maybe some better choices of ideas. And that's how we landed on AI. So I love seeing y'all's suggestions of topics that are appropriate for discussion at those upper levels that do offer like different perspectives, but in a appropriate and developmentally appropriate way, so that we are not discussing the death penalty with the articles that we found in English 1. Hopefully not. But anyway, yeah, I love seeing y'all's responses. It's so interesting, especially looking at that effect size with graphic organizers. That's such a simple thing to include in our instruction, in our work with students, but has such a huge effect size. So if it's something you're already doing, I mean, pat yourself on the back. I'm doing an evidence-based strategy that's has high impact on my students. And how can we implement those more and integrate those more in the instruction that we're doing? I love that you like the way that the lessons are laid out. I think that is another great way of just providing an example of a lesson. You have your indicator at the top, you have their key vocabulary with the definitions, then you have a brief explanation of it below. How effective would those be to use in PLCs? And really dissecting activities or lessons that you have for your students. I think that would be powerful in a grade band time, or even in a vertical articulation or a vertical discussion time. You have that plan that you can all work from and study from. Right. Oh, I love the last part that came in from Cody talking about the 6th grade moon landing activity, focusing on perseverance. Oh, I love that. And how closely could you tie that to your social studies and pulling in those themes of social studies? So I think that's very powerful. All right. Well, with that said, we are moving to our clarity and closure a little bit early today. I'm okay with that on July 5th. I hope you are too. Our purpose today was to provide you some instructional strategies for AOR 4.1 for grades 5 through 9, or 5 through English 1, because we know English 1 is not always taught in 9th grade, in order to enhance instruction and improve student outcomes. So in the chat, describe one way this purpose was met. How did we meet this purpose today? Yes, Alice, as simple as that, right? We discussed different teaching strategies. Casey?
Oh, same thing. I'm just quite a few people mentioning the different lessons or strategies or activities, looking at several grade levels worth of instructional plans, lesson ideas provided, discussed how they could be used, clear strategies for implementation, and that discussion around instruction through the evidence-based lens. I think that piece was really key.
Mm-hmm. I know when ESSA was first presented to me, and it's here's the law and here's what you're supposed to be doing, and you have to have evidence-based instruction. That's daunting, right? It's intimidating to hear that, especially for someone like me who's a rule follower. I want to know the rule and meet the rule. Well, these are things we're doing. If we can evaluate our practice and see, I'm using evidence-based strategies, and here are 3 ways I'm doing that already. How powerful is that as educators to be able to say that about our instruction? I hope that information brought you comfort today with seeing some of these strategies and thinking, this is stuff I do. This is something we engage in recurringly in my classroom, to empower you to know that the practices that you are using in your classroom are evidence-based, and they have high effects for students. So that brings us to our end, and we have a little plaque, plate priority. So this is one reflection activity that we do in some of our presentations, where we just kind of reflect on what we learned together today. So our first one is, what's on your plaque? What have you accomplished or learned today? Is there anything that's new information? Then I want you to think about your plate. What do you still have on your plate? Or what next steps do you have after learning what you've learned today? And then finally, your priority. What is your priority or the first thing you want to do when you get back to your classroom or get back to the audience that you support? And why? What's your priority in light of the information shared today? So I want you to choose either a plaque. What do you want to put on your plaque? What have you accomplished today? Your plate, share your plate. What do you have as your next step? Or priority. What's your priority and the first thing you want to do with the information we shared today? Go ahead and drop those in the chat. Your plaque, your plate, or your priority. Ellen, I love that. Yes. Yes, I love that. That we can add that to our plaque. Evidence-based instruction is the law, and here's how I'm meeting the law, right? Very good. Yes. Oh, I love that, Alexis. Never be satisfied with the current best. Beautiful, beautiful. Yes, especially looking at your plates, guys, as y'all are moving back into the school year. Casey and I were just looking. We have a document that shares the start date of every district in our state. We were looking, oh my gosh, some people are starting back on July 22nd. That's when school starts, not just teachers report. We were looking at those this morning. This is relevant, actionable information for you. In just a few short weeks, you will be tasked with teaching these 2024 ELA standards. So on your plate, your next steps would be to implement these indicators with fidelity and with confidence because you know this information now. Casey, anything you're seeing that I'm missing?
I'm seeing a lot of people mentioning taking information back to their school or to their team and having some discussion, not just around the language of the indicators and the shifts, but also some of those instructional strategies, taking some time just to digest some of the information or the resources that have been shared, and even taking that back and reflecting in connection to current practice. What am I doing that is evidence-based, or where might I need to adapt some, some practices, and just a lot of next steps about making this work actionable with students or with your grade level team, which is awesome.
Very good. Awesome. Awesome. All right.